I came here to write. That was all I wanted. Just a quiet place where the noise of the city, the endless demands of people, and the sharp edges of an unfulfilled life could fade into the trees, leaving me to finally breathe. My mother always told me I had my grandfather's restless spirit. He was a recluse who had left behind this old cabin hidden deep in the woods of Maine. It felt as though the cabin was meant for me, as if I'd inherited not only his retreat but also his urge to escape a world that asked too much. The journey here was long, winding through narrow, dirt roads that twisted through the depths of pine forests. Every mile felt like an erasure of my life back home, as though the thick canopy of branches above was swallowing up memories and worries, leaving me in a place suspended outside of time. The cabin, smaller than I remembered, stood like a lone sentinel against the wild, a squat, weathered structure with warped wooden boards and a roof that dipped in the center. It had no electricity, no running water, but it felt like a refuge. I unpacked with a kind of excitement that came from hope and desperation mixed into one. Canned food, a single lantern, my favorite blankets, and my typewriter, the only companion I'd brought with me. The cabin's silence was so dense that it felt almost solid, like a blanket made of stone draped over everything. Outside, the trees whispered in the evening breeze, tall shadows moving just outside my view, reminding me how small I was out here. I sat at the wooden table, facing the single window that overlooked an endless sea of trees, and began typing. But as the first words filled the page, something felt off. I brushed it aside as nerves or the effect of isolation, but the silence didn't feel comforting. Instead, it was heavy and unsettling, pressing against my skin as I typed. I shook it off, focused on the story that had been rattling around in my head for months, desperate to be let out. Yet, every time I paused, my fingers hovering over the keys, I thought I heard a faint, whispering sound, like someone murmuring outside the walls. The next day, I set out to explore the surrounding forest. It was a familiar landscape from childhood visits, but I wanted to see if maybe, just maybe, walking outside would calm the feeling of being watched. I hoped that by walking under the open sky, I could dispel the sensation that had been settling in my chest since my arrival. The woods were beautiful, but they felt strange, ancient in a way that went beyond age. The trees were towering, branches interlaced above in a canopy that let only faint shafts of sunlight through. I wanted to lose myself in the scenery, to find peace in it. But no matter where I turned, the feeling remained, a prickle on the back of my neck, as though the forest had its eyes on me, watching with an intensity that I couldn't shake. By the time I returned, the sun was beginning to set, stretching long shadows across the ground that seemed to reach for me as I walked. The cabin, my intended haven, felt different now. Darker. I sat down to write, but my hands were trembling. The cabin's silence had become hostile, and the faint creaks of wood felt like whispers of warning. I laughed it off, reminding myself of why I'd come here, to write, to find a story worth telling. But the fear was real, worming into my bones. As night fell, the whispers grew louder. I wanted to believe it was just the wind, but there was a rhythm to them, like breathing, as though something or someone was standing close, just on the other side of the walls, murmuring my name. The fourth night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. Soft, barely audible, like the shuffle of leaves or a gentle tap on wood. But unmistakably, they were footsteps. Someone, or something, was outside. I held my breath, heart pounding, my ears straining against the silence. The footsteps circled the cabin slowly, each step deliberate, as though they were meant for me to hear. They would stop, pause, and then start again, until they finally stopped altogether. I barely slept after that. I tried to convince myself that it was just an animal, but no part of me believed that. Each night, the whispers persisted, the footsteps returned, and with each passing hour, the feeling of being watched intensified. I stopped sleeping. I stopped writing. All I could do was sit in that tiny, dark room, listening to the whispers as they filled every corner, watching the shadows that seemed to creep in, pressing against me, demanding my attention. And then, one night, I heard the door creak open. I knew I had locked it. I checked it again and again, as if by some superstition, gripping the handle until my knuckles hurt. But now it was open, swinging inward as if it were an invitation, beckoning me to step out into the waiting night. My body moved on its own. Barefoot, in my thin pajamas, I stepped outside. The air was cool, my toes sinking into the damp earth, and the ground seemed to pulse beneath my feet. The forest was silent, as though holding its breath, the trees towering over me, their branches drooping down, as if waiting to reach out and pull me in. And then I saw it. A figure, tall and unnaturally thin, standing at the edge of the clearing, half hidden by shadows. Its limbs were elongated, too long, twisted like the branches above me. Its face was obscured, but I felt its eyes, heavy and penetrating, peeling away every layer, seeing into me with an intensity that left me raw and bare. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, watching as it raised a hand, fingers so long they seemed to grow with every inch they rose, reaching out toward me. A coldness washed over me, as though I'd stepped into an icy river. The chill pierced my skin, burrowing into my bones, pulling me away from myself. I felt my fear wane, replaced by something empty and dark. My body felt hollowed, the strength seeping out of me like blood. The last thing I remember is that touch, a burning cold, and the feeling of something slipping away, something vital, leaving me hollow and empty. It was as though it had taken something from me, something I could never regain. When I opened my eyes, the figure was gone. The forest was silent, the cabin dark and empty. But I was different. I knew that I would never leave. The whispers had followed me, filling the empty spaces that were once my thoughts. I came here to write a story, but now I know that I have become part of one.